history in Richmond and led a round table, and then I don't see the rest. Could you?
Yeah, I saw something good. And I think I was asked to talk on grassroots resistance and grassroots organizing.
Great.
And we're very lucky. It's not often that someone, that a town like Richmond has a progressive fighting mayor, someone who, and really you should, we have a book here, Winning Richmond by Gayle. And there's another book by a speaker, some of you may have heard, Steve Early, called, what's it called? Refinery Town, about Richmond and about how Gayle became the mayor. So it's quite a story. I don't know if we'll have time for all of that, but she's going to talk to us a bit about some of the work that they've done and maybe give us some ideas about what we might do.
Great, great. So thank you for that introduction, both of you. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Cal, for the invitation to be here. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed hearing the other speakers. It's Ian, and the other was Ignacio, who must have left, I think. Yeah. Okay, and hearing the discussion and going on the tour, lovely tour, much information, and just I see so many similarities with some of the issues we have in Richmond with the issues you have here at the Headlands. So I also want to applaud all of you for the work that you're doing to really organize and keep the pressure up to really get a full cleanup at the Fort Bragg Headlands. So as was stated, I'm a two-term mayor of Richmond. I also was a council member. Altogether, I served 13 years as an elected official in Richmond from 2005 to 2017. So it was only recently that I'm no longer an elected official, and I'll tell you later about a little bit about what I'm doing, just mention it. 8 of those 13 years I served as mayor, and I want to share with you, we were able to make some major accomplishments. And the reason we were able to make major accomplishments is because we formed an alliance that we called the Richmond Progressive Alliance, otherwise known as the RPA. And our city, just to give you a little background, is a very diverse city. It's a majority people of color community. We have 40% Latinos, 27% African Americans. And we're about 110,000 people in the San Francisco Bay Area, right near Berkeley. So before we formed the RPA, our city was dominated by Chevron. We have this major Chevron Richmond refinery in our city. It's the largest, most productive refinery in the state of California. We get the pollution, they get the money, billions of dollars that they make every year. And we were a company town. That's why Steve Early's book was called Refinery Town, because we were, for decades, for 100 years, a refinery town, just like, or a company town, just like Fort Bragg was known as a company town. We're no longer known as that because of our transformational work that we did. And I want to just share with you a little bit about how Chevron dominated the city council in particular. So first of all, before we started our progressive organizing, which happened in 2003, Chevron had control of the whole city council, and they had control due to the fact that they funded all the candidates into office. And after they were in office, they gave them advice on all their decision making. So, and in fact, in the 1990s, to give you an example of how close the city and Chevron were, a Chevron representative had a desk outside the city manager's office. So that's, believe it or not, how close this City Hall and Chevron were. But in 2003, as I mentioned, we formed the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and we began to transform the city by electing corporate-free candidates who would take no corporate money, which was new in Richmond, and we educated the community. We are here to represent you, not to represent big corporations. And we also came together regardless of party preference. We came together based on our progressive values, because I think this was mentioned a little bit by other speakers. It's our values that bind us. So one of the biggest values that we had and still have is that corporations should not be in our electoral arena. That's for the public, not for the private sector. So all four of my campaigns, two campaigns for city council and 2 campaigns for mayor, were ran and won without a dime of corporate money or developer money, I might add. And we had other elected corporate-free candidates as well, so it wasn't just me. At one point, we had 5 out of 7 city council members who were also members of the RPA. So that's a super majority of progressives on the city council. And the reason we were able to get there is because of grassroots organizing. And we outreached to the community, we educated them. You know, when we started out, people were like, well, you know, you can't beat City Hall, you can't beat Chevron, you know. And we said, no, we can do this if we join together. And so the advantage of utilizing campaigns as an organizing effort is that you not only build a local movement around the candidate, but then when you get your candidates in office, you have support. The office holders have support, and of course the office holders must support the community, and that's, you know, it's like a reciprocity relationship. So we were able to build a better Richmond based on economic, social, environmental, and racial justice. So I share this with all of you because I know that you are also concerned about your city council acting, you know, perhaps outside of the interest of the community and the environment. And I want to encourage you all to keep up the organizing work that you're doing, because I know you will succeed. That's what it takes. So I want to share a couple examples, a couple concrete examples of our successes in Richmond that I think have some similarities and some overlap with what you're doing. So one of them is the pushback we did on Chevron and what we accomplished. And the second example has to do with one of the toxic sites on our San Francisco Bay Area shoreline. Richmond borders the San Francisco Bay. We have 32 miles of shoreline. So first, Chevron. We pushed back on the oil giant in various ways. We beat them and their millions of dollars over and over again by reaching out to the community, you know, door knocking, being at all the community events, talking, interfacing, and holding forums, etc. Not unlike this one. We held a people's convention in 2004 and you know, heard from the community and built those relationships. And let me give you an example of how much Chevron spent to try and defeat us. In 2014, Chevron spent $3 million to defeat our candidates. 3 of us were running. Now this is in a city of 110,000, not a really big city, you know, so big, you know, sometimes corporations don't spend that much money on congressional candidates, but they spent $3 million to try and defeat us. Well, all our candidates won, and all the Chevron-funded candidates lost. So it can be done. So we also organized to oppose an expansion at the refinery where they were going to refine, or that, you know, they were the chance of them refining, and we thought the chance was big. Heavier, dirtier crude like tar sands was going to be part of this expansion project. So we beat that. You know, we managed to get that stopped. And then they went back to the drawing board and created a better project, which they put conditions on. First of all, they couldn't do the heavier, dirtier crude, but they also had to limit their pollution. We also forced them to pay more in taxes because corporations should pay their fair share. We had a whole campaign about that. And we got over $100 million in additional taxes from Chevron to be paid over 15 years. So again, it takes that community effort, which I know you all know. We also sued them in court for a major refinery fire that they had in 2012, and sent thousands of people to local hospitals for respiratory problems. And we pressured the regulatory agencies to fine them, which they did, and also to prosecute and convict them, which they were, of willful neglect of maintaining the refinery. We also repealed a policy that was in place for decades where Chevron was allowed to self-inspect, self-permit, and self-certify its own certain projects. They always have certain projects that they're working on, small projects. They were allowed to do that on their own. So we repealed that. The city has to be involved and have its inspectors go in. So things are different today. But it wasn't only Chevron that we had to deal with in terms of heavy industry, because Richmond had a lot of heavy industry over the years, but many companies have moved on and left their toxins behind, and I know you know all about that. So it's not unlike what you're dealing with at the mill site. And there's one site in Richmond that we refer to as the Zeneca site. It's an 86-acre site on our shoreline that was contaminated over the course of 100 years and left behind a toxic brew of hundreds of chemicals. I mean, really heavy-duty chemicals that landed it as a Superfund site on the federal Superfund list. So prior to Zeneca owning the site, now Zeneca owns it, but the Strawford Chemical operated at the site, and they manufactured pesticides and herbicides, and they diverted chemicals to these chemical evaporation ponds. So, I know you have a pond issue too. So these chemical evaporation ponds are still there, and we're still working on having those cleaned up. Later, Zeneca merged with AstraZeneca and became AstraZeneca. And then they closed the site until in 1997 and began a really inadequate cleanup from 1999 to 2002. They dug up the soil, this very toxic soil, and spread it over 30 acres, exposing the nearby residents and businesses to extreme toxic dust on the cars. Somebody mentioned on the cars you see the dust, and people were getting sick, and unusual cancers and even deaths. The community and workers were exposed to dangerous toxins such as VOCs, PCBs, arsenic, lead, mercury, and other heavy metals, as well as DDT, benzene, and other. There's a whole list, of these harmful chemicals. And then these toxins were capped on site, covered with a thin cap, forming what was tantamount to a toxic dump on our shoreline. Totally inadequate approach, and yet one that Zeneca and its consultants continuously defends as sufficient. So a remedy which does not remove all the toxic waste is a Band-Aid. It's not a remedy. The city went along with this inadequate cleanup. This was before we formed the RPA, before I got in office. But we were starting to get active, and they set up, they were in the process of approving a development project, and this project was to build high-density, high towers, residential towers, on top of this toxic dump, and with 350,000 cubic yards of toxic soil buried underneath it. And they knew there would be soil vapor coming up, toxic, hazardous soil gas. So the proposal was to put fans underneath the building or on the basement of the building to whisk away this toxic soil gas. So people were outraged. This was a threat to future residents. It was a threat to current residents and threat to the environment, threat to current businesses in the area. So this is what we were up against when we started organizing for a comprehensive cleanup. And to give a little history of the struggle, and I think you have the same history, this toxic site was first under the authority of our regional water board. And so we had to advocate for DTSC oversight. We actually had some help initially from Assemblywoman at the time, Lonnie Hancock, and she got some of the site under DTSC control. And then when I got in office, I put forward a resolution, and we kept calling Cal EPA, and finally got the whole site, plus the neighboring UC Field Station, which is also toxic, under DTSC control. So we took advantage, so one thing we did once we got DTSC oversight was we took advantage of their public process and we formed a community advisory group, a CAG. And we still have the CAG in process, and DTSC comes to meetings and we discuss the cleanup, we give them advice. When you live in the community, you know what's going on, where things are happening. When the cap is being compromised, you know, weeds grow up through this cap, and of course toxins come out through there. So we constantly, in the signage, we pushed for signage, we got hazardous material signage, which wasn't on before. So you have to be involved as a community. And we pushed the city, which was still supporting this development project, and finally we killed the project. You know, the city abandoned it, the developer abandoned it. I mean, it was clear that the developer just gave up in the face of so much opposition. But what we had to do was hold rallies, demonstrations. We built a coalition, so it wasn't just the RPA, it was other groups, and we really did a lot of outreach, and we had community members speaking out at council meetings all the time. So as mayor then, you know, once I went from council member to mayor, I was involved in meetings with city staff and DTSC, and we hammered home the need for moving forward with the highest standard of cleanup. Because, you know, the whole thing was, well, you could clean it up to, you know, industrial standards, but no, we wanted it cleaned up to the highest standards. And one thing we did was the city designated its land use designation as mixed use. And this was a little bit of a compromise from the community because some community members wanted it fully designated as open space. But we became aware of is DTSC was saying, we cannot clean it up. I mean, I suppose if Zeneca would voluntarily pay for a comprehensive cleanup, we could have had that, but they weren't going that route. So they said we could only force a comprehensive cleanup if there's residential. So we had it designated mixed use. I think it was already that way, but we were thinking of having it changed, but we stuck with mixed use. And then what happened is that that was a big, you know, we really were able to get DTSC to understand that the city had the right to to have a full cleanup because we were going to have some residential on this site. But there became then a new issue. I mean, this was big, and city staff came on the side of the CAG. That was the big success. Because city staff was always resistant, all these CAG people, we're not sure about them, but then city staff joined with the CAG and said, hey, listen, we have our own police powers as a city to designate our, you know, areas in our city with the kind of zoning and land use designations that we think is best. And so we want to have mixed use, and so there will be residential. DTSC said, okay, well, residential areas can be cleaned up to the highest standard. However, and this was the catch, and that we're still kind of at a standstill. We want to know, DTSC said, what parts of this 86-acre site will be residential? And the city said, we can't tell you that because we don't have a development proposal currently in front of us, and we want to be flexible. You know, we are a low-income community. We want to have the right kind of development here that, you know, helps the city, and we don't know which areas. We want to have some flexibility with our outreach to developers. So we think it's important you clean up the whole site so that we have this flexibility, you know. And so DTSC, you know, balked a little bit, and I'm not 100% sure where things are at now. But the whole issue is, even apart from where the residential is going, the whole site should be cleaned up. And it's for the reasons that many of you have talked about. There's the issue of storm surges, there's the issue of sea level rise, there's the issue of earthquakes. And when that happens, everybody is, the environment is affected, residents on site, wherever they are, will be affected, and people off site, because the toxins can move off site. The fact is, toxins don't know boundaries. They don't have a boundary. It's like, we're only going to stay in this area. You know, they leach into the groundwater, even as we speak, and of course the tide rolls in and out, as it rolls in, it picks up some of the toxins and rolls back and contaminates the bay. So we were really, really clear in the fact that human health and environmental health is the reasoning, why we need this full cleanup. And it's also the issue of liability. Because when I was in office, it was like, okay, you know, well, I'll only be in office for a certain amount of time, but future city councils may have the liability facing them if there's problems. And who pays for the liability? The taxpayers. So it's on the community that will have to pay for any lawsuits that come up because of toxins leaching and impacting the environment or the community. So there are lots of similarities in the work that we did in Seneca and that we're still doing and the work you're doing here as a community. So let me conclude by saying that grassroots mobilizing is really the key to making change. And I just wanted to look at the big picture. If we go back to the civil rights movement, the women's movement of today as well, the civil rights movement of today, the anti-war movement, and the environmental movement. We know it is people mobilizing together, showing our political muscle together that makes the difference. That's how you don't get ignored, when you have that unity, that solidarity. And I want to encourage you to keep doing the work you're doing. If it's pressuring your city council or educating them, working with DTSC, making it clear that you want, I mean, to me, you know, the Koch brothers should be paying for this cleanup here at full cleanup at Fort Bragg, just like Seneca should pay for a full cleanup at the Seneca site. Form a local progressive alliance if you haven't. I mean, in some ways you are like an alliance, but you know, have regular meetings, and if you want, you could run people for office if you're not getting the kind of reception from your city council that you want, and run them without corporate money, and tell them, you know, educate the community that, hey, we're a different way that you're used to. We are running to really represent the people. So basically that's what I wanted to share with you. You're on the right track with this symposium, obviously, and keeping community pressure going forward. But before I end, I want to mention that I'm currently the chair of the California Progressive Alliance, which is a statewide alliance, fairly new, started in 2018. We had our founding convention earlier this year, and we're having our second convention in January 2020, January 11th and 12th at UC Berkeley. So it would be great if you all could come. We expect about 800 to 1,000 people from across the state. And the whole idea is to bring people together in a statewide way, and you know, also bring groups together. And lots of time for networking and such. And so Cal mentioned my book, and we have I wanted to mention that Paul has some flyers about just giving you information and the website for the convention if you want to pick one up from him. And we have a few more copies of that we have with us of Winning Richmond, the book I wrote, which really does go into all the work we did, you know, in addition to the environmental work, like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, rent control. We stood for our immigrant community, a sanctuary city, and we reduced crime. Richmond was known as the heavy crime city. We reduced homicides 75%. So we did some transformational work. So now we're not known as a company town, we're known as Richmond, the progressive city. So we got a lot more work to do. But thank you so much. So any questions or comments? I'm happy to.
Hooray.
Any questions? Dr. Gayle?
This thing about which parts are going to be residential and which parts aren't. I would think that any open space near residential area that residents are going to be occupying and spending their leisure time in is just as valid in terms of needing to be cleaned up. How could this agency not enforce that or see that?
I can provide you some information that there's different levels of cleanup. And so if it's open space, it could be recreational levels, it could be residential is the most conservative. So and that has to do with exposure comp pays and the amount of time you spend. For residential, it's calculated as 24/7. And for the other scenarios, it's calculated at different levels. But again, I'm not the technical person, so I can share that through George and
And who sets those standards?
they're derived, it's a good question. We have, let's see, under Cal EPA, there's various departments. We're one of them. And there's the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And they're the ones that sets those levels.
Thank you.
So I'm very interested in some of the other things that you mentioned here at the very end, like setting the minimum wage at $50 an hour, which still isn't a livable wage in the state of California, but it's better.
Yes.
Some of the development that's being proposed for Fort Bragg, not currently in the mill site, but in other areas that I'm sure will happen in the mill site, are formula and franchise stores. So, and very notorious for not paying living wages. So even those stores, like grocery, outlet, bargain market, they have to comply with this Richmond.
Absolutely, every business, small businesses, big businesses. We started out at 13, we were one of the first cities that moved to 15, and we started out with, I think, 12, 16, and then each year went up, and now we're at 15. And we thought about exempting small businesses, but we figured we gave them enough time. And we had somebody from UC Berkeley, an economist, talk with us and say, is this feasible for small businesses to still thrive? And they told us, well, if you phase it in over 5 years or so, it is feasible. And so, and some of our small businesses were already paying $15 an hour. You're right that the formulary businesses sometimes are the problems. But yeah, but it took us a while to convince the other council members because they were, some had some business ties there. But we had lots of presentations. We had the unions, various unions on our side, and we got it passed. Yeah.
How about your businesses?
Pardon?
How about your businesses, the support of your businesses?
Yeah.
Are they all on board now?
Yeah, so one thing we did a lot during the time I was in office, and I think it's still happening, we really brought in a lot of green businesses. We were #1 in the Bay Area for solar installation per capita in 2010. That's because we had a green job training program, and we brought in a lot of solar businesses. So that was a real focus for us to switch away from heavy industry. I mean, Chevron's still there, of course, but toward more environmentally sustainable businesses and who would help us along the pathway of being a sustainable city. And we did bike paths, and we really made some changes in that regard. But and we trained our workforce in terms of green solar installation and sustainable plumbing and whatever. And that became really useful. We gave rebates to residents who wanted to put solar on the rooftops if they used our graduates from the solar installation program. So we went with jobs and green, and yes, we support our small businesses. We want every business to be responsible.
Don't you also have your own waste management district in Richmond?
We have a Richmond, we have a Richmond Waste Management District. There's there's Stige Waste Management and Richmond, so different parts of the city are handled by different waste management districts, but Richmond has one which is sorely in need of renovations. So that's been a problem with some leaking into the bay. We were fined and had to make corrections, but you know, that's an ongoing issue, yeah.
I congratulate you. I lived in Richmond in the early 70s, and we moved out because of the number of gunshots we heard every day.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
congratulations.
We worked hard by giving people opportunities. That's how we change the crime situation.
Could you be more specific about how you brought solar businesses in?
We did some, yeah. We would do outreach specifically to various businesses that were interested in relocating, and we'd say, come to Richmond, we have the space. We worked to build a cluster of green businesses, so we held some meetings with the businesses that we currently had that were being sustainable, even if they weren't specifically a green business, like creating a green product, but they were doing things that were sustainable. And that seemed to attract other businesses.
Okay.
We started getting national attention for some of the work we did, and people, and I used to be a Green Party member. I'm now no party preference. Like I said, we came together in the RPA regardless of party preference, but I was a Green Party member, so I became known as the Green Mayor. So I think that, you know, I was on KPFA periodically talking about things, and so that may have encouraged some green businesses, knowing that, you know, we had sort of a movement around green policies.
And do you have your own power company, or are you part of PG&E?
We're part of Marine Clean Energy. We're part of a community choice aggregation program. So we have our residents get cleaner, greener energy, and it's less expensive. I don't know if you're part of a community choice energy program.
We are, Sonoma Clean Power.
Oh,
But it didn't result in.
No, it didn't save us money.
oh, it didn't save you money? Oh, okay.
Well, it will.
It
actually.
will
I believe it will. Right
Yeah.
now, there's, PG&E is doing everything it can to fight things, but I really think that the direction that Sonoma Clean Power is going in is a good one myself. But obviously, not everyone here agrees with that. But yeah, there were a number of tricky little things that PG&E did, as you know, because they've done it to all.
Yes.
Same thing has happened in Marine Clean Energy. What looked like it was going to be a really good deal, PG&E put in some black boxes that have these mysterious numbers that are to pay for the misadventures of their investments in nuclear energy and other things like that. So they're still getting the people who are using entirely green energy to pay for their past mistakes.
Yes.
So this has to be rectified bad, but
Yeah, there's this battle with PG&E on so many fronts.
Huge.
Yeah, with the fires and everything, and potentially their lack of maintenance of the lines and
Well, I
such.
was wondering if there was a way that the city could reward people who put in solar panels.
Well, we did give them a rebate. At one time, the city did. And I don't think it has the capacity to do that anymore. We were able to do that during the early Obama years because the city reached out extensively for grants, and Obama had that stimulus program, I forgot what it was called, ARA or something. And so we got a bulk of money, and so we utilized that to provide jobs, or partially for this. We utilized it for many things, but partially to give people rebates to get more solar on their rooftops throughout the city, and also to give jobs to our from our training program. So, yeah.
Very interesting, the training program. And the training program ran through did the training program work through like a R&D?
We have a job training department. It's under our, I'm even trying to think what, it used to be under the redevelopment agency. But we do have a department and a manager of job training, a director of job training. And the city acquired a building right near City Hall, and the training, actually now we have 2 or 3 sites where the training is done. And one thing we do is because we had a lot of people in prison because of the high crime, and we have a lot of re-entry services now when people come out of prison, which we don't want them to re-offend. And so we train them through the Green Job Training Program. So we really, and we also utilize some money to create a reentry solution center that gives these parolees opportunities and gears them into whatever they need, housing opportunities. So, but yes, I think the training centers that we have are great. I used to go to the graduations as mayor, like every couple of months, a cohort would graduate, and the young people especially. But there was older people as well who were having to be retrained from they were laid off or whatever. And it was always such a inspiring experience to watch these people step into a new life. Yeah.
One more question, and I think we have to transition. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, maybe it's a big question, but maybe you could speak quickly just to how, sort of on a pragmatic level, on the how to do it level, you bridge the gaps of the different, in organizing the different communities in Richmond.
You mean different, like different races and cultures and such? We worked at that very much. I mean, we started out with a diverse group, and you know, people come in organizations and they go, and at a certain point, we realized we didn't have as many people of color in our steering committee as we wanted, so we did some real targeted outreach to African American organizations, Latino organizations, and said, what can we as the RPA do better? What can we wanted to hear from them, and we want you to join us. We'd love to have some of you step into our steering committee and help us, you know, build a stronger organization. And we took a whole year to do that outreach, and by the end of the year, we elected our new steering committee, and it was a majority people of color, majority women, and it was not quite a majority young people, but it had a lot more young people. So we did that targeted outreach to really bring people together. And as mayor, I was at every community event. I just really, you know, loved being the community involved mayor and engaging with all the different sectors of our community. And I think we just built that bond they saw me as someone who was very receptive, and I saw them as people, you know, having their struggles and wanting to help and overcome. We overcame things together. So it took a little bit of work, a lot of work, I should say, but we were able to make the community come together. Now, that's not to say that there still aren't problems, because there are, you know, and, you know, there's probably, you know, groups. There was the brown-black divide for a while, you know, African Americans were saying brown people were taking their jobs or whatever. And I held a Women's Day event every year, for an International Women's Day event every year, and we brought people together of women of all different races. And what occurred from one of our Women's Day events was a brown-black dialogue of women leaders. And not only did they talk and share a table at the women's event, but they kept that dialogue going afterward. So we just really did whatever we could to help facilitate unity. So,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
One more. What's the relationship with Chevron like now?
So Chevron is certainly not controlling our city council like they used to. We had that super majority on the city council at one time, but we lost a couple of seats, and so now we have 3 out of 7 RPAers, you know, not quite a majority. One is Chevron dominated. He got reelected. He's an 80-something-year-old man. He had a base that, you know, he was able to reactivate, and they elected him in 2018. So he's been, he's pretty close to Chevron, but he's, you know, doesn't have that ability to really articulate even arguments as you know, would be needed to bring Richmond backward in time. So we're still moving forward. Chevron, I think they're still trying, and we expect in 2020 to get more RPAers back on the council, and we expect Chevron, although they won't do it directly anymore, they won't contribute directly. They'll do it indirectly through a PAC, and you got to read the small print, you know, funded by Chevron. And so we expect that we have to keep fighting them. They don't give up, as you know. Big corporations don't give up. But they were set back, and they realized, I mean, You know, as mayor, I would have to talk with them periodically, and they would come to my office, I'd talk with them. Like, I went to Ecuador to see the damage that Chevron did to the Ecuadorian rainforest. They hated me for that, and Chevron came in and told me everything I was saying about that was a lie. So I just sat there and listened and said, well, thank you for your perspective, you know? What else can you say, you know? But they're threatened by us, so they work a little more covertly.
So, Al, are we ready to transition?
Sure.